Alright, good morning everybody and welcome back. Quick update since the last video. A couple of things have moved on. First of all, we managed to remove both of the hydraulic arms, the 3-point arms. They were pretty tough. We landed up having to heat these knuckles quite severely and then pound out these pins. You can see, Oscar, if you can zoom in.
Yeah.
You can see how corroded these are and actually also quite pitted. Now that's quite normal. I think these are generally quite difficult to get out, so I wasn't surprised in the end, but they will all be cleaned up and we may even replace these pins, I'm not sure. We'll check them out once we get them nice and clean and then those will go back. The other interesting thing was the castellated nuts on the other side. In both cases the split pins had to be literally broken off, cut off. There was no way they were going to come out. So again, I don't think those have been removed for a very long time, probably never. But the good news is both these arms are now off and we can move those aside and we'll work on those as separate projects. We'll be stripping this leveling box at some point. That'll be a separate video. Replacing I think there's a bush in there and a couple of seals, so we'll get those sorted out at some point. We'll also be removing all of these pivot points and sorting those out, and also we'll also remove the other side of the knuckle at some point. But as I say, that's going to be a separate video which we'll do at a later point. So as I say, they can be moved to one side now, and we will move on to today's video. Okay, so for today's video we're going to remove the rear axles, and the first job we needed to do was to drain the oil out of the back end of the tractor. Quite a significant amount of oil came out. In fact, it took us by surprise and we had to stop it halfway through and put additional buckets in. But that's all done now and the back end is empty. Now we want to remove these stub axles. Now that comes off as a single unit, so you've got the stub axle itself which runs all the way through the trumpet. You've got the backing plate, the brake backing plate, so that will all come off as one, along with this bar which is the brake activating bar, and connected to that over here we've got all the linkages for the pedals, the two pedals, and that all needs to be loosened, removed before we can start. But to actually get the whole unit out, what we need to do is remove all of these bolts around the outside here. Once all of that's loose, the entire axle should pull out, and we'll then have the ability to inspect the bearings, the seal, which we know is not great, but we'll be able to get a good idea, a good impression of the condition of the bearings, and then obviously replace the seal, which is our ultimate goal here. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is remove, there's a split pin here which needs to come out, which will allow us to remove this bar, or at least loosen it. Now a lot of the split pins that we've taken off so far have basically disintegrated, so I'm hoping that this one is actually going to come out. Oscar, can you see if you can find me a side cutters, please?
Side cutter.
We've got one? No, side cutters, darling. One of the points on the end. The cutting ones. Normally, the ones we normally use for cutting wire.
Cutting wire.
Sometimes it's easier to get in there with the side cutters. Obviously you have to be careful not to cut the thing.
Awesome.
You got some? Thank you.
Can I try? I've got some special junior ones.
Can you take your best coat off, please?
Okay.
Okay.
So just twist them down.
Oh, you've got to get. See if we can get hold of it first. Okay, so the alternative is that we'll have to cut it off. And what you do is you have to cut both sides off. And you have to cut it flush to the pin so that the pin can actually come out. No?
I'm gonna keep trying.
No. Right, we need to cut it off.
Why?
Because I'm going to try something different now.
Oh.
What I'm going to try and do is now I've cut one side off, I'm going to try and use a small punch to knock it out. And see if it'll come out that way. There we go. Done.
Whoa!
Okay, so that pin is
Crazy.
out.
Now we should be able to pull this out.
And no,
Oh.
now we need to remove these two. Although to be fair, the whole thing could go. No, or rather,
Why?
yeah, we'd rather take the whole thing off.
Yeah.
Okay, so I need to find the right socket for this, but I think this is it. And again, very tight. I suspect it's a combination of it being painted over and the other side is moving, which is annoying.
Do you want me to hold it?
You won't be able to, Oscar.
Oh, okay.
Maybe need to do this the other way. There we go. That's better. You can see that the thread's on there, that hasn't been opened for a while. Which is understandable. Okay. And the other thing we can do is we can push a screwdriver in there just to open that slot up a little bit, which will help. Okay, okay. There we go.
Oh.
Much easier to do it that way.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, the interesting thing, that looks, you can't see it on the camera, but it's actually quite nice and shiny in there, so I'm happy about that. And again, on this bar, that isn't, if that had been corroded, pitted, then that would have had to be cleaned up, but that's actually okay, which is good. Okay, Oscar, we've got that mostly loose. We'll get the rest of it off when we've got the whole thing off. So the next job is to remove all of these nuts. Okay? If I remember correctly, it's that socket there, so you can have a go, see if you can get them loose.
I'll come around this so I'm not blocking your view.
Which way is it?
I think it's that way.
Or what did Lance tell us?
Righty, tighty, lefty, loosey.
So which way are you going to go?
Oscar, you're going the wrong way.
Which is your right hand?
You're looking
Which
at
is your left
it,
This is my right.
so you need to be loosening it.
hand? Lefty, loosey.
Say it again. Righty, tighty. Lefty,
Oh, yeah.
loosey. Lance, we need another phrase.
Sorry, lads.
And what was the other thing he told us? Have more power pulling than pushing.
Oh yeah.
Yeah? So let's try this one. See if you can pull that towards you, or pull it up.
Thanks, Lance.
Yay.
There you go.
Lance, we've got a young apprentice here if you want him for a month or so. Sure, he'd love to come and work in your shed.
Yeah.
But I'll have to come with him because, you know, he'll need supervision.
Okay, so this is a bit awkward because we can't get a full-size socket in there, ratchet in there because it's too close to the bell housing. So we have to use this, I don't know what they call it, but it's one that flips over.
Yeah.
Okay. So what you need to try and do is go as far back as you can,
Pull.
and then pull it, and then twist it round before you go past that. Okay.
Okay, that's cool. Can I
Like
try?
that. Yeah.
Oh. Okay.
Well, that one's finger loose now anyway, so we'll probably do the next one. Do the next one. That's it. Now what are you going to do? Remember, you want to pull it towards you, so position it. No.
What?
First of all, which way's left? Just think about which way's left first. Yeah.
Yeah, but now you're pushing, right? So, well, that's one option, but what I was going to suggest is if you put it lower down and pull it up.
Oh,
It
okay.
needs to be really low to start, and then you can pull it up to the left.
So position it where you want it. Go down, 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 down. Go all the way down. That's it. Now, that's it. Right, now pull.
Oh, oh, oh.
That was like a tough one.
It won't go because...
Okay, where's your part?
No, Dad, it won't go because it'll hit the axle. This.
It's hitting the axle.
It'll go, but anyway, just try it a little bit higher. There you go. Try there. Pull it up.
Yeah.
There you go.
Personally,
Not the best camera angle.
I know! It's hard, I have to put my weight on that.
I know.
How you doing?
I can't get my stick off.
Now I want you to have a look here. Mommy might need to zoom in.
I need to move completely.
Okay. So look what's happening on this one, Oscar, when I turn it. You just move back, you're in the light. Okay, do you see what's happening? The whole stud is moving, so it's actually unwinding from the back of this hub.
Ooh.
Okay, so when we've got it out, we'll have to take the nut off and we'll have to reset that stud back into this housing. So that's another job we'll have to do before we put it back together. Okay?
Yeah, so what is that? Right there.
What?
All that stuff.
Break.
Oh, okay.
Right, Oscar, I think we've got all those nuts off, so this is now ready to come off.
Yeah.
It's probably going to need a little bit of encouragement, but in theory this whole thing should pull out now. Okay?
With the axle.
With the axle and with this bar. Okay?
Okay. So,
Is that going to be heavy?
Yeah.
So when you say the axle, is it the whole outside bit that's resting on
No.
that support?
No, the internal.
The internal.
axle.
Oh, yeah.
so is it like all through this one and this one?
No, it goes
Just-
halfway.
Oh, so like here.
Yeah, inside there joined what they call the crown gear, which we'll see in a future video.
Okay.
Okay, let's see how we go. Oh,
Oh, lots
Easier.
Oh!
Very good. That was a lot easier than I was expecting, but that's good. Not a bad thing. So Oscar, if you can come and support the brake line.
Okay.
Try not to get too much in front of the camera, okay? If you can help it.
So just hold it.
Yeah.
Woo! An axle. Ooh. Oh, sorry.
Okay, there we
So
go.
that's what the axle looks like.
That's what the axle looks like. And we've got a spline gear on the end, which goes into the crown gear.
I think I can.
Okay, I'm just
Yep.
going to put it down here.
I saw the ground gear.
Okay.
And that's like going in there from this light here.
Okay, now, Mommy, we probably need you to come zoom in here.
Yep.
Okay, so on here, Oscar, we've got, these are called shims.
Yeah.
And their job is to set the clearance, or the clearance between the two axles so that they're not rubbing up against each other at this point here, right? So you have to have the right clearance, but you also don't want it to be too far away, otherwise it won't engage with the spline properly. So these are made in different thicknesses, and you use different thicknesses to set the distance between this surface here and this surface here, which gives you the right tolerance, they call it, for the axle. So this one, we must remember, this one came off this side. We'll mark it in a minute, we'll label it so we know this one.
So, like, a number one on the axle and a number one on that.
Yeah, something like that, yeah. Okay, and then
And
when
then
we
on
take
the
the
other
other side off, we might find different. It might be the same, but it could also be different. Okay?
Yeah, if it. But
So that's the
I
first.
still think we should mark it like 2 and 2.
Yeah,
Just
we
in
will.
case it's a very slight difference.
Yeah, we will. Okay, so that's the first thing. The second thing is, if you look down in here, you've got the big roller bearing,
Which
okay,
is going quite well.
which feels pretty good to me. Yeah, that's the main.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
nice.
so that's the main bearing, and you see this is a metal collar,
Yeah.
solid metal, and that's been heat shrunk onto this shaft.
Oh.
Okay, so you heat it up till it's red hot, and you drop it down here, it falls in place, and as it cools, it shrinks and grips onto the shaft like that.
Yeah.
So to get that off, yeah, like that, yeah. If we wanted to get that off, if we needed to get that bearing out, what we have to do is basically break this collar.
Ooh.
And the way you do that is you drill a hole through it, and then you take a chisel and you smack it with a chisel until it cracks, and then it comes off. That's the only way to get it off. Okay, so that's one axle. The good thing is that this surface is nice and clean.
Yeah.
Now, Sparrex make a seal, which I found out from Lance at Bundy Bear Shed, which will allow us to actually reseal this without, because the seal that is leaking is actually on the other side of the bearing underneath here. So to get to that, we'd have to remove this collar, we'd have to remove the bearing, then remove the seal and replace it. To prevent us having to do all that, there's a new seal that we can put over here, which basically seals this whole bearing off from the back end of the tractor, the transmission, and stops that oil from leaking past. What it does mean though is we then have to pre-grease this bearing so that it's always got grease on it. But that's what we'll do when we put it all back together.
Except the leak is on the other side.
Yeah, but this side is leaking slightly as well. So both sides need doing. Wow, we had a lot of fun. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it too. In the next video, we'll be removing the trumpet housing and accessing the crown gear. Join us for that, and we look forward to seeing you in the next video.